Before this story begins, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harrison Mitchell's corner office on the 45th floor of downtown Manhattan. At 42, he had built his tech empire from nothing, and now Mitchell Industries was worth over $3 billion. His salt and pepper beard was perfectly trimmed, his navy suit impeccable, and his steel blue eyes held the sharp focus that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. His phone buzzed with a text from his 8-year-old daughter, Madison. The blonde little girl with bright green eyes was the light of his life ever since his wife Sarah had passed away in a car accident 3 years ago. Madison lived with him in their sprawling estate in the affluent suburb of Westfield, where she attended Riverside Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. The text was simple. "Daddy, look, having lunch with friends." Harrison smiled as he opened the photo. Madison's beaming face filled the frame, her golden hair catching the fluorescent lights of what appeared to be the school cafeteria. She was wearing her favorite pink hoodie with sparkles on the front, the one she'd insisted on buying during their last shopping trip. But as his eyes moved beyond his daughter's radiant smile, something in the background made his blood run cold. Behind Madison, barely visible but unmistakable, was a smaller girl with platinum blonde hair. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and she was kneeling on the floor next to a garbage can near the lunch tables. Standing over her was Mrs. Victoria Hensworth, Madison's teacher, a woman in her 50s with graying brown hair pulled back in a tight bun and cold, dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The scene was disturbing enough to make Harrison's hands tremble. Mrs. Hensworth appeared to be pointing aggressively at food scraps and discarded items in the trash bin, her mouth open as if giving harsh, degrading commands. The little blonde girl was crying desperately, her tiny hands pressed against her face as she shook her head repeatedly, clearly refusing whatever humiliating demand the teacher was making. Other children at nearby tables looked uncomfortable, some turning away from the horrifying scene while others watched in shocked silence. Harrison's heart raced as he enlarged the photo, hoping he was misunderstanding what he was seeing. But the more he studied it, the clearer it became. The little blonde girl's clothes were noticeably shabbier than the other children's. A faded yellow dress that had seen better days, scuffed shoes, and an expression of pure terror and humiliation as tears streamed down her cheeks. The teacher's body language was unmistakably threatening, her finger pointing aggressively downward toward the garbage bin while the child cowered and wept. Whatever degrading act Mrs. Hensworth was trying to force the little girl to perform with the trash, the child was courageously refusing despite her obvious terror and the psychological pressure being applied. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice echoing in the empty office. Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his fingers moving with the urgency of a man who had just witnessed something unthinkable. 911, what's your emergency? This is Harrison Mitchell. I need police dispatched immediately to Riverside Academy on Oak Street. There's a teacher psychologically abusing a child, trying to force her to do something degrading involving garbage while she cries and refuses. I have photographic evidence. The dispatcher's voice remained professional but concerned. Sir, are you currently at the school? No, I'm downtown, but I'm leaving now. My daughter is a student there, and she inadvertently photographed what appears to be child abuse in progress. The teacher is trying to force a small child to do something involving trash while she cries and refuses. Please send officers immediately. Units are being dispatched now, Mr. Mitchell. Please remain calm and head to the school safely. Harrison was already moving, grabbing his keys and jacket. As he rushed toward the elevator, his mind raced with questions. Who was this little girl? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't any of the other teachers or staff noticed? Or worse, why hadn't they reported it? The elevator seemed to take forever to reach the ground floor. During those agonizing 30 seconds, Harrison studied the photo again, memorizing every detail. The timestamp showed it was taken just 12 minutes ago, which meant whatever was happening might still be in progress. The image of that small girl's tear-stained face, her desperate refusal even in the face of obvious intimidation, burned itself into his memory. His black Tesla was waiting in the executive parking space. As he sped through Manhattan traffic, Harrison called his assistant. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day, Patricia. Family emergency." "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Is everything all right with Madison?" "Madison's fine, but there's a situation at her school involving another child. I'll explain later." The 20-minute drive to Westfield felt like hours. Harrison's mind kept returning to the image of that small, frightened girl, and his anger grew with each passing mile. As someone who had grown up in foster care himself, moving from one home to another after his parents died in a house fire when he was 7, he had zero tolerance for anyone who would harm a child. He knew what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of adults who saw you as nothing more than an inconvenience. By the time he reached Riverside Academy, 2 police cruisers were already in the parking lot, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the brick facade of the school. Harrison parked and jogged toward the main entrance, where he was met by Detective Sandra Martinez, a woman in her 40s with short black hair and keen brown eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Detective Martinez. Can you show me the photograph you mentioned?" Harrison handed her his phone, watching as her expression grew increasingly grim as she studied the image. "When was this taken?" "About 35 minutes ago. My daughter sent it to me without realizing what she'd captured in the background." Detective Martinez nodded grimly. "We've already spoken with the principal and she's granted us permission to investigate. The teacher in question, Victoria Hensworth, is currently in her classroom. We haven't approached her yet because we wanted to speak with you first." "What about the little girl in the photo? Is she okay?" "That's what we're trying to determine. The principal claims she doesn't immediately recognize the child from the description, which is concerning for a school this size." Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean she doesn't recognize her?" "Every student at this school should be familiar to the administration, especially one that young. If there's a child here who isn't properly enrolled or accounted for." Detective Martinez didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. They walked through the main hallway, past colorful bulletin boards covered with student artwork and achievement certificates. The normal sounds of a school day, children laughing, teachers instructing, the hum of daily activities, seemed surreal given what they were investigating. As they approached Mrs. Hensworth's classroom, Harrison could hear her voice through the closed door. She sounded normal, professional even, reading what appeared to be a story to her students. The disconnect between that ordinary sound and what he had seen in the photograph made his stomach turn. Detective Martinez motioned for Harrison to wait in the hallway as she knocked on the classroom door. Through the small window, he could see his daughter Madison sitting at her desk, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break around her. But as his eyes scanned the classroom searching for the little blonde girl from the photo, his heart sank. She was nowhere to be seen. The detective's knock interrupted Mrs. Hensworth's reading. Harrison watched through the window as the teacher's expression shifted from mild annoyance to something that looked almost like panic when she saw Detective Martinez's badge through the glass. Mrs. Hensworth opened the classroom door with what appeared to be her usual stern expression, but Harrison could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the doorframe. "Yes? Can I help you?" she asked Detective Martinez, her voice carrying the clipped tone of someone trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly slipping away from her. "Mrs. Hensworth, I'm Detective Martinez with the Westfield Police Department. I need to speak with you about an incident that occurred in your classroom earlier today." For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across the teacher's face. Definitely fear this time, mixed with what looked like desperate calculation. Harrison, watching from the hallway, caught the moment when Mrs. Hensworth realized she was in serious trouble. "I'm sorry, but I'm in the middle of teaching my class. Perhaps you could come back after school hours?" She tried, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "I'm afraid this can't wait, ma'am. We have some questions about a photograph taken during lunch period today." Mrs. Hensworth's grip on the door handle tightened visibly, her knuckles turning white. "I don't understand. What photograph?" Detective Martinez held up Harrison's phone, showing the incriminating image. Mrs. Hensworth's face went pale as she stared at the screen, and Harrison saw her mouth open and close several times before any sound came out. I don't. That's not what it looks like, she stammered. But even she seemed to know how weak the protest sounded. Then perhaps you can explain what it actually is? Because what I see is you standing over a crying child who appears to be refusing to do something you're demanding of her. Harrison couldn't contain himself any longer. He stepped forward, his voice controlled but seething with barely contained fury. Where is she? Where is the little girl from the photo? Mrs. Hensworth's eyes darted between Harrison and Detective Martinez, and for a moment, she looked exactly like what she was. A cornered predator who had finally been caught. I don't know what you're talking about. All of my students are accounted for and properly cared for. That photograph must be taken out of context. Then you won't mind if we search the building and speak with your students? Detective Martinez asked, though her tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. The detective gently moved past Mrs. Hensworth into the classroom, where 24 third graders sat at their desks, wide-eyed at the unusual interruption. Harrison followed, immediately spotting Madison, who looked confused but not frightened. She waved at him with the innocent enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could muster in such a bizarre situation. Hi, Daddy. What are you doing here? Are you here for a surprise visit? Before Harrison could answer, Detective Martinez addressed the class in the gentle but professional tone she used when interviewing child witnesses. Good afternoon, children. I'm Detective Martinez, and I'm here to ask some questions about lunchtime today. I need you all to think carefully. Was there a little girl with blonde hair in your cafeteria who doesn't usually eat lunch with your class? The children exchanged glances, some looking genuinely puzzled, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Several hands went up hesitantly, and Detective Martinez nodded encouragingly at a girl with curly red hair. Yes, Detective, there was a girl there. She had really pretty blonde hair like a princess, but she looked really sad, the girl said, her voice small but clear. Madison raised her hand immediately, and Detective Martinez nodded for her to speak. Her name is Chloe, I think. She's not in our grade. She's younger than us, maybe 6 or 7. I've seen her around school sometimes, but she never gets to play with us. That's right, chimed in another student, a boy with dark hair and glasses. Chloe. She was crying really hard today because Mrs. Hensworth was being mean to her. Mrs. Hensworth's face had progressed from pale to an alarming shade of red. Children, that's enough. You're misunderstanding what you saw. Detective, I really must protest this interrogation of my students without proper. What exactly did you see, Mrs. Hensworth do to make Chloe cry? Detective Martinez asked the boy, completely ignoring the teacher's protest. The boy looked nervously at Mrs. Hensworth, then back at the detective. She was pointing at food scraps in the garbage can and telling Chloe she had to eat from the trash like an animal because she was worthless. But Chloe kept crying and saying no, and then Mrs. Hensworth got really angry and started yelling that ungrateful children deserved to eat garbage. A collective gasp went up from several parents who had apparently gathered in the hallway, having heard about the police presence at the school. Harrison felt his anger spike to dangerous levels. Another girl, this one with blonde braids, raised her hand tentatively. Mrs. Hensworth said if Chloe didn't eat from the trash like she was told, she would call the police and have Chloe's mommy arrested. That's when Chloe started crying even harder and saying, no, no, no. But Mrs. Hensworth kept pointing at the garbage. And she made Chloe kneel down on the floor for a really long time, added another boy, even when she was crying and saying her knees hurt. Harrison watched Mrs. Hensworth's face cycle through several emotions: panic, anger, desperation. She was clearly trying to think of a way out of this situation, but the children's testimonies were painting a picture that was impossible to deny or explain away. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside with me right now, Detective Martinez said firmly to Mrs. Hensworth. Officer Johnson will escort you while we continue speaking with the children. As Mrs. Hensworth was led toward the door, her composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand. That child's mother is a drug addict who abandoned her here. I was trying to teach her responsibility and consequences. Sometimes children need to learn. Ma'am, anything else you say can and will be used against you. Detective Martinez cut her off sharply. Officer Johnson, please read Mrs. Hensworth her rights and escort her to the patrol car. As the teacher was led away, her protests echoing down the hallway, the children visibly relaxed. Detective Martinez turned back to them with a gentle smile. "You've all been very brave and helpful. Now can anyone tell me where Chloe is right now?" The children looked at each other uncertainly. Finally, Madison spoke up. "I saw Mrs. Hensworth take her away after lunch. She was still crying and Mrs. Hensworth was pulling her by the arm toward the basement stairs." "The basement?" Harrison's voice was sharp with concern. A boy named Tyler nodded solemnly. "Mrs. Hensworth takes kids down there when they're in trouble, but usually just for a few minutes. Chloe's been gone for like 2 hours." Detective Martinez and Harrison exchanged alarmed glances. A 6-year-old child had been locked in a basement for 2 hours as punishment for refusing to degrade herself. "Can you show us where the basement entrance is?" Detective Martinez asked Tyler. "Sure, but we're not supposed to go down there, Mrs. Hensworth says there are scary things in the basement that will get bad children." Harrison's jaw clenched. The psychological manipulation was almost as disturbing as the physical abuse. They were joined in the hallway by Principal Janet Morrison, a nervous woman in her 60s who kept wringing her hands. She looked completely overwhelmed by the situation unfolding in her school. "Detective Martinez, I've been trying to locate this Chloe in our enrollment records, but I'm not finding any student by that name," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "What about the security footage from today's lunch period?" Detective Martinez asked. Principal Morrison's face fell even further. "That's another problem. Mrs. Hensworth told me yesterday that our security system needed emergency maintenance and had it shut down. She said the repair company couldn't get here until tomorrow." Harrison and Detective Martinez shared another significant look. The timing was far too convenient to be coincidental. "Principal Morrison," Harrison said, his voice deadly calm. "How long has Mrs. Hensworth worked here?" 15 years. She's been a model employee until today, obviously. I can't understand what's happened." Just then, Eddie Rodriguez, the school's maintenance supervisor, approached them in the hallway. He was an older man with kind eyes and work-worn hands, wearing a janitor's uniform. He looked deeply troubled. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly to Detective Martinez. "I couldn't help but overhear about the little blonde girl. Is her name Chloe?" All eyes turned to him. "Yes," Detective Martinez said. "Do you know her?" Eddie nodded slowly, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. "She's not supposed to be enrolled here. Mrs. Hensworth has been bringing her to school for exactly 1 month now. I know because I started keeping track when I realized something wasn't right. Told everyone she was doing a favor for a family in crisis, watching the kid while the mother dealt with serious medical problems." "What kind of problems?" Harrison asked. "Mrs. Hensworth said the mother was sick and couldn't care for the child properly. Said she was helping out until other arrangements could be made. But the way she's been treating that little girl..." Eddie shook his head sadly. "I've wanted to say something for weeks, but Mrs. Hensworth made it clear that if I interfered, she'd find a reason to get me fired. What exactly have you witnessed?" Detective Martinez pulled out her notepad. Eddie looked around nervously, then seemed to steel himself. "I've wanted to report this for the entire month, but Mrs. Hensworth made it clear that if I interfered, she'd find a reason to get me fired. She's been systematically breaking that child's spirit. Makes Chloe clean the bathrooms with her bare hands. Forces her to eat lunch separately from the other children. And not proper food either, just scraps or leftovers from other kids' plates. She's made that poor baby sleep in the supply closet during nap time while the other kids get mats in the classroom. And the verbal cruelty." He shuddered. "Constantly telling the child she's worthless, that her mother abandoned her, that she should be grateful anyone bothers with a throwaway child like her." Harrison felt something dark and violent rise in his chest. The systematic psychological torture of a 6-year-old was beyond his ability to process rationally. "And today?" Detective Martinez prompted. "Today was the worst I've seen in this entire month of hell. During lunch, some milk got spilled, not even by Chloe, but by one of the other kids. Mrs. Hensworth made Chloe get on her hands and knees to clean it up, then started pointing at food scraps and garbage in the trash bin and..." Eddie's voice broke slightly. "She was commanding that baby to eat from the garbage like an animal. telling her that's what worthless children deserve. When Chloe refused and started crying, begging not to be made to do it, Mrs. Hensworth became furious and dragged her downstairs, screaming about teaching ungrateful brats their place. The hallway fell silent except for the sound of Harrison's harsh breathing. Detective Martinez placed a restraining hand on his arm, recognizing the signs of a man on the edge of violence. "Where exactly in the basement?" she asked Eddie. "There's a storage room at the end of the main corridor. Mrs. Hensworth has a key to all the rooms down there." "But Detective," Eddie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "I heard her on the phone this morning, talking about making arrangements for the child. Something about how this situation needed to be resolved permanently." The implications of that statement hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't just abuse. There might be something far more sinister happening. "Take us there now," Detective Martinez ordered. As they headed toward the basement stairs, Harrison's phone buzzed with a text from Madison, who was now with the school counselor. "Daddy, is Chloe going to be okay? She's always so nice to me even though she looks sad all the time." The message broke something loose in Harrison's chest. His own daughter, secure and loved and protected, had noticed another child suffering and cared about it. Meanwhile, he had been oblivious to the fact that somewhere in his city, a little girl was being systematically tortured by someone who should have been protecting her. They reached the basement level, and Eddie led them down a dimly lit corridor lined with storage rooms and utility closets. The basement smelled of cleaning supplies and dampness, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, creating an atmosphere that would be terrifying for any child, let alone one who had been locked down here as punishment. "It's that door at the end," Eddie said, pointing to a heavy wooden door with a simple latch lock, the kind designed to keep people out, but clearly being used to keep someone in. As they approached, they could hear something that made Harrison's heart break. The quiet sound of a child crying, muffled but persistent, the kind of hopeless weeping that came from someone who had given up believing that help was coming. Detective Martinez reached for the latch, then paused. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to prepare yourself. A child who's been through this kind of trauma may be very frightened of adults, even ones who are trying to help." Harrison nodded, though he wasn't sure how anyone could prepare for what they were about to find. Detective Martinez lifted the latch and slowly pushed the door open. The sight that greeted them was one that would haunt Harrison's dreams for years to come. The storage room was barely 6 feet by 8 feet, lined with metal shelving units filled with old textbooks and cleaning supplies. The air was stale and thick, and the only light came from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the corner, huddled on the concrete floor, was the smallest, most heartbreaking figure Harrison had ever seen. Chloe looked even tinier in person than she had in the photograph. She couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds, her platinum blonde hair tangled and matted, her yellow dress now stained with tears and dirt from the basement floor. Her small arms were wrapped around her knees, and she was rocking back and forth slightly, the way traumatized children sometimes did to self-soothe. But it was her eyes that shattered Harrison's heart completely. When she looked up at the adults in the doorway, those blue eyes, so remarkably similar to his own, held a depth of fear and resignation that no 6-year-old should ever experience. She had been crying for so long that her face was blotchy and swollen, her breath coming in little hiccups. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm sorry I was bad. I'll try to be better, I promise." Detective Martinez immediately crouched down, making herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Sweet girl, we're not here to hurt you. My name is Sandra, and I'm a police officer. We're here to help you get somewhere safe." Chloe's eyes darted frantically between the detective and Harrison, clearly trying to assess whether these new adults represented more danger. "Is Mrs. Hensworth coming back? She said she had to think about what to do with me because I wouldn't listen." "Mrs. Hensworth is not going to hurt you anymore," Harrison said gently, his voice thick with emotion. "She's gone, and she's never coming back to bother you." For the first time, Chloe looked directly at him, and Harrison felt a jolt of recognition that went beyond physical resemblance. There was something in her expression, a quiet intelligence mixed with wariness that reminded him powerfully of himself at that age. "Are you a police officer too?" she asked Harrison. "No, sweetheart. I'm..." He paused, unsure how to explain his presence. I'm someone who heard you needed help and I came as fast as I could. Detective Martinez continued speaking in soothing tones. Chloe, can you tell us about your mama? We'd like to help you get back to her. At the mention of her mother, Chloe's face crumpled again. Mama's really sick. She's in the hospital, and the doctors don't know if she's going to get better. Mrs. Hensworth said she would take care of me, but then she started being mean and making me do scary things. What kind of scary things? Detective Martinez asked gently. Chloe's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She made me clean the bathrooms with no gloves and my hands got all red and burny from the chemicals. And she said I couldn't eat with the other kids because I wasn't a real student, just a charity case. She made me eat standing up in the corner, and sometimes there wasn't enough food left. Harrison felt his hands clench into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm for Chloe's sake. She told me my mama didn't really want me anymore and that's why she was sick. Chloe continued, fresh tears starting to flow. She said if I didn't do what she told me, she would make sure I never saw Mama again. The systematic psychological cruelty was almost worse than the physical abuse. Mrs. Hensworth had deliberately attacked every source of security and love in this child's life. Chloe, Detective Martinez said carefully, Mrs. Hensworth lied to you about many things. Your mama loves you very much, and none of this is your fault. As they helped Chloe to her feet, Harrison noticed she was clutching something in her small fist. When she saw him looking, she opened her hand to reveal a small tarnished locket on a delicate silver chain. Harrison's world stopped. He knew that locket. He had chosen it carefully 7 years ago, selecting the one with the small rose engraved on the front because the shop owner had told him roses symbolized eternal love. He had given it to Jennifer Parker on the night he told her he was falling in love with her, 3 months before his world exploded, and he made the biggest mistake of his life by walking away. That's a beautiful locket, he managed to say, his voice barely steady. Chloe looked down at the jewelry in her palm. My mama gave it to me before she got really sick. She said it was from my daddy, but I never met him. Mama said he's important and busy, and he doesn't know about me. She said maybe someday I'd get to meet him, but probably not because he lives in a different world than we do. The words hit Harrison like physical blows. Jennifer had been pregnant when he left. She had known she was carrying his child, and she had chosen to disappear rather than complicate his already chaotic life. She had spent 7 years raising their daughter alone, working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and now she was dying in a hospital while their little girl was being tortured by a monster. Chloe, he said carefully, what's your mama's full name? Jennifer Marie Parker, but everyone calls her Jenny. She works at 3 different restaurants because she says we need the money for rent and food and my doctor visits. Harrison's vision blurred slightly. Jennifer had been working 3 jobs to support their daughter, while he lived in a mansion and worried about which luxury car to drive to work. Detective Martinez was watching Harrison carefully, noting the profound change in his expression. Mr. Mitchell, are you all right? I need to make some phone calls, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Detective, can you stay with Chloe while I... Are you sad? Chloe's small voice interrupted him. Harrison looked down at her, this precious little girl who had endured so much and was still worried about a stranger's feelings. I'm sad that you've been hurt, sweetheart, but I'm also hopeful that things are going to get much better for you very soon. Do you think my mama's going to be okay? Mrs. Hensworth said she was probably going to die because she doesn't take care of herself. The casual cruelty of that statement made Harrison's anger spike again. I think your mama is very strong, just like you are, and I'm going to make sure she gets the best doctors and all the help she needs. Chloe looked at him with curiosity. Are you rich? Mrs. Hensworth always talks about rich people like they're bad, but you seem nice. Harrison knelt down to her level, and for the first time since they'd found her, Chloe didn't flinch away from an adult. Some rich people are bad, and some poor people are bad, and some people in between are bad too. But there are also good people everywhere, and the good people try to help each other when they can. I wish my daddy was a good person, Chloe said wistfully. Mama says she doesn't know if he is or not, because she didn't get to know him long enough to find out. Harrison felt his heart breaking all over again. What would you want to say to your daddy if you ever met him? Chloe considered this seriously. I'd want to know why he didn't want to meet me. And I'd want to tell him that Mama never said mean things about him, even when she was sad. She always said maybe he would have stayed if he'd known about me. The accuracy of that statement was devastating. Harrison knew with absolute certainty that he would have married Jennifer the moment he learned she was pregnant. He would have moved heaven and earth to protect both of them. Instead, he had been so focused on clearing his name and saving his company that he'd never even considered the possibility that Jennifer might need him. As they began walking toward the basement stairs, Chloe slipped her tiny hand into Harrison's. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt like the most important moment of his entire life. "Mister," she said as they climbed the stairs, "what's your name?" "My name is Harrison," he replied. "What do you think of that name?" Chloe tilted her head, considering. "It's a grown-up name, very important sounding. Are you important?" "I used to think I was," Harrison said honestly. "But today I learned that the most important thing I could ever be is someone who protects children who need help." When they reached the main floor, they were greeted by a scene of controlled chaos. Principal Morrison was dealing with concerned parents. Several teachers were gathered in worried clusters, and reporters had somehow already gotten word of the situation and were being kept at bay by additional officers. Detective Martinez led them to a quiet office away from the commotion. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe this child might be your daughter?" Harrison looked at Chloe, who was sitting in a chair next to him, still holding his hand. The physical resemblance was undeniable, but it was more than that. It was the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the determined set of her jaw even when she was frightened, the quiet intelligence in her eyes despite everything she'd been through. "Yes," he said simply. "I know it sounds impossible, but yes. I was involved with her mother 7 years ago, and the timing, the locket, everything fits." Detective Martinez nodded. "We'll need to arrange for DNA testing to confirm paternity, and there are legal procedures we'll need to follow. But first, we need to get Chloe to a hospital to make sure she's physically okay.